Alright everyone, so remember how one of my friends is an aspiring writer and sent me some character drafts of his to edit? Well, now he's trying his hand at world building, and of course gave me an outline and illustrations to critique. And in case you're wondering, yes, they are just as stupid and nonsensical as his other stuff, but that won't stop me from making a video about it and getting a few good laughs in. Okay, so getting to the outline itself, it starts off with a bit of a history lesson. So my friend wrote that he was super inspired by this ancient myth called TERRA Australis. Its earliest known endorser was actually Aristotle, and then was later taken up by Claudius Ptolemy and a lot of other really smart guys throughout history. The legend of TERRA Australis is basically that there's a massive stretch of land on the southern part of the globe that is yet to be discovered. That is actually what TERRA Australis literally means too, the southern land. Of course, we all know that there is nothing down there, but writing fiction is all about doing whatever you want. So my friend created a world where this mythical land did actually exist. He even called it Australia, after the myth. So my first critique for his world building so far is actually going to be pretty positive. I think it was a great choice to use real world legends as inspiration. This can give a good basis for a writer to grow off of. Where things start to get a bit wonky is in the specifics of Australia. First and foremost, my friend couldn't decide if he wanted it to be a series of continents sharing one landmass or a series of competing countries on a single continent. So he just decided both. Australia would be a single continent and a single country. Now, on one hand, I do like that this makes Australia instantly unique. No other continent on Earth is comprised of a single country. But on the other hand, I do think that there is merit in a world being uniform to some degree. If every other continent has other countries in your world, it would probably be wise to have Australia follow suit. Still though, not that big a deal, especially when considering the more atypical aspects that my friend included. He wrote Australia to just be ridiculously big, and for no good reason. This outline I'm looking at says that Australia is about 3 million square miles. That would make it the 4th largest country in the world. For some perspective, the outline also dictates that Australia has mega deserts, one of which is the size of the United Kingdom. You could lose an entire country inside one of Australia's deserts and not even notice. And like I said before, there is no good reason for it. My friend was very clear in writing that Australia's largest population ever would be about 25 million people. That would put it at 55th in terms of real world population. More people than that live in Texas. Honestly, my friend made so many weird design choices when creating this place. He wrote Australia to be the second driest continent on the planet, while also having 91% of its surface area covered by vegetation, all the while receiving more snow than Switzerland. It's the only continent without an active volcano, while also having none of its native animals have hooves. My world building critique here would be to really consider the specifics of your world when creating details. All these stats and rankings I just rattled off came from a simple Google search. When you're first starting out, it might seem like these specificities don't matter, but when you actually have to start writing narratives that occur in your created world, where you have to incorporate travel times and natural resources and environmental hazards, choices you made in the initial world building phase can really come back to bite you in the butt. However, being bitten in the butt would probably be the least of your worries if you were ever to be so unfortunate as to find yourself in Australia. Honestly, thank God a place like this doesn't actually exist, because my friend went overboard when creating the wildlife. In the lore section of the outline, just to start things off, he wrote that ancient Australia was populated by massive animals called megafauna. And by massive, I mean monitor lizards the size of polar bears and ducks the size of horses. And the modern day animals unique to Australia aren't designed much better either. They're all just so weird. My friend made these things called, and I'm gonna make sure to say this right, kangaroos. Imagine a rabbit that was also a burlap sack that was also Mike Tyson. That's pretty much a kangaroo. Or how about this thing called a koala? They nearly exclusively live off poison and routinely die of starvation because they can't grow more teeth when their old ones wear down. But nothing, and I mean nothing, can beat the platypus. I say this with no hyperbole, it is the unholy fusion of a duck and a beaver. And don't worry, I know what you're thinking, but Savage Books, beavers and ducks aren't even in the same— yeah, I know, you're preaching to the choir here. Despite the fact that it lays eggs, and it has venom, and it's part duck, my friend was adamant that the platypus is a mammal. And I won't even get into the fact that he wrote that 10 of the 15 most venomous snakes on the world are in Australia, or that he made an animal called the wombat that poops in cubes, or that Australia has jellyfish the size of match heads that can kill a fully grown man, or that there are more camels in Australia than Egypt. I'm gonna ignore all that and just get to my edit. It's absolutely fine to include unique and interesting wildlife when world building. Every place needs to have something that makes it stand out. But in creating your lands and countries, make sure that the animals fit in with the genre and tone of your world. The wildlife my friend created would work super well inside a science fiction or a fantasy, but Australia is supposed to be based on the Earth we know. Wildlife is a tricky subject even for the best of writers, so don't be afraid to keep it simple when you're first starting out. Once you get a better sense of your world and the environment you will be dealing with, then you can expand into more unique creatures that can jive with the logic of your world. Still, if you thought the animals are strange, wait until you hear about the people. My friend decided that the natives, called Aborigines, would be the oldest culture group on the planet. In his footnotes, he wrote that the Aborigines would have been on the continent for about 50,000 years, which is absolutely insane. But the Aborigines are not the ruling class of Australia in a modern day context, not even close. The outline states that Australia was conquered and colonized by the British Empire, causing the deaths of large portions of the native population. I actually really like this detail too because it adds believability to the world. I know for a fact that my friend based this off of the colonization of America, and it works well here to add some realism. Where my friend chose to make a left turn was deciding that the entire country would start as a penal colony, basically one big prison. He wrote that the first police force set up on the country was called the Night Watch and was actually completely comprised of criminals and convicts. If this sounds a little bit familiar, it's because my friend is a super huge Game of Thrones fan and was inspired by the Night's Watch and how many of its members were former criminals. Honestly though, some of the craziest world building details come from the conflict between the people and animals of Australia. For instance, the country had such a bad problem with dingoes that they built a fence to keep them out of the fertile parts of the country. But of course, it couldn't just be any regular fence. My friend wrote that the dingo fence was over 6,000 kilometers long, which would make it the second longest man-made structure in the world next to the Great Wall of China. Oh, and remember the detail about there being more camels in Australia than in Egypt? Well, to add some nuance to that strange fact, my friend created an entire section of Australian history where the camels bred like rats, turned rabid, and started destroying the ecosystem of this already hellish environment. To answer this problem, the Australian government, in all its fictional wisdom, decided it would be best to just kill the camels, so they started a countrywide operation of massacring the animals. They had to kill roughly 160,000 rabid camels before the problem was under control. But, and bear with me here, the Great Emu War takes the cake. Now, emus aren't Nazis or orcs or aliens or anything like that. My friend's outline says that they're essentially the Australian version of ostriches, so pretty much just big birds. So a war against them sounds like it wouldn't be that big of a problem, right? Well, the outline says that 20,000 emus saw fit to invade Western Australia during their annual migration, destroying acres of farmland during their occupation. Just like with the camels, the government of Australia chose to answer the problem by throwing a bunch of death at it. Hence, the Great Emu War started, and oh boy, it did not go well. My friend created a character in the Australian Army called Major Meredith, specifically to give this amazingly stupid quote regarding the war. Meredith says, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. The emus can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. They are like the Zulus." After killing approximately 3,500 emus with machine guns, the Australian military just gave up, realizing that there was no way they could possibly take on the entire emu army. They resolved that the only thing they could do was build fencing around important farmland to keep them out. So my critique for all this craziness with the animals is a pretty simple one. Just tone it down. It's one thing to have an invasive animal population. It's another thing to have an organized government go to war with birds and lose. This 6,000-mile dingo fence and camel genocide make Australia seem more like a parody of a country than an actual place where people live. There's a very fine line between creating epic history for a place and creating ridiculous circumstances that would make the audience roll their eyes. Most civilizations center their major conflicts around human struggles, and I would make the same recommendation to my friend. Emus and dingoes and camels sound really great, but they don't really hold up under scrutiny. The conflicts themselves are thought out, but I would put people at their center instead of animals. Now, there is a lot I could continue describing here, like how Australia's Prime Minister set the world record for chugging beer, or how an Australian town sued NASA for $400 over littering, but I think you all get the point. I hope you had as much fun hearing about my friend's stupid world building as I had telling it, and I will be sure to be back with more as soon as he gives it to me. As always, it was a pleasure, and I will talk to you all again next week.